once you see how the sausage gets made and you start like setting up your campaigns and speaking the language of the sausage makers, oh my gosh, you can achieve so much more economic output. You can achieve better relationships with your vendors. You can work more efficiently. Like it's incredible. So, learn the language of the sausage maker. That's my takeaway there.
I love it. We got to clip that
Yeah,
one.
exactly. Learn the language of the sausage maker. That's the intro that you'll just
Yeah.
use then.
Every company knows they need to do it at some point, but what work actually goes into a great brand campaign? Maya Spivak builds tech brands. Today, she joins us to share how she built Wealthfront and Segment's brands. Welcome to Grow and Tell, the show where we tell the growth stories of the revenue leaders behind today's successful companies. I'm your host, Alex Krakoff.
Grow and tell, grow and tell.
Maya Spivak is a marketing leader based in the Bay Area. She most recently led marketing for developer brands Mux and Gretel before going off on her own as an independent consultant. For today's episode, I wanted to talk to Maya about the brand campaign she led at Wealthfront and Segment. At Wealthfront, she led several major product launches, including a successful TV ad campaign with over 30 spots. Then in 6 years at Segment, a customer data platform, she ran a memorable billboard campaign, launched a user conference, and helped build the branding foundations that led to a $3 billion acquisition by Twilio. Today, she shared what went into executing those campaigns and how companies should think about brand building. I hope you enjoy. So I'd love to start today's conversation with your time at Wealthfront, where you were a marketing director responsible for product and brand. I'd love to know what made you join Wealthfront and what was it like when you joined?
Oh man. When I joined Wealthfront, there was 23 other people, so I was number 24. And I joined because I deeply loved the product. And I loved the product for years before I joined the actual company. So I was one of those people that was a very noisy customer where I would send in, my thoughts and my feedback. And it helped that I actually lived in Palo Alto at the time because Wealthfront was based in Palo Alto. I was born in Palo Alto. And I one day walked past a building which had a sign in the window, literally one of those like cardboard, not cardboard, but styrofoam board signs. And on the front was printed the first Wealthfront logo, and it was literally propped in the window. And after I saw that, I was like, whoa, this is the Wealthfront building. And then I went back and emailed them. I was like, hey, I'm a customer, love the product. By the way, I live in Palo Alto. Did you know that, like if you have customers that maybe live in Palo Alto, which probably you have a good handful because we're all tech people, and they walk past this location and they see this like styrofoam board in the window, they might not think the brand is like super legit and it's like safe to park your money there and invest in an automated fashion. Like maybe that thought might cross their mind. And that's when we connected based on that, light and and good intentioned feedback. And they were like, probably a little bit offended, but in general, that made the connection between me, like a very enthusiastic customer, and them, very enthusiastic founders. And we were, exchanging notes for probably about a year before they asked me to join just as a marketer, and exchanging notes like I was an alpha user of basically everything. And they're like, hey, we're about to announce this, like what do you think? And I would just send back some notes.
Very cool. And
Yeah.
I know one of the founders of Wealthfront was Andy Ratcliffe,
Yes.
right? Who I guess was a benchmark partner and had a big career before Wealthfront and came up with the
Yes.
idea of like, so it sounds like you were trading notes with him directly. And was he the one who would hire you or is it someone else? And I'm curious, like when you did join, like what was your first kind of goals as a marketing
Yeah.
director?
Yeah, he's definitely one of the people. He took me out for a cookie. He bought me a cookie. Well, I was working at
Nice.
Google at the time, and so we picked a nearby cafe to meet and hang out. And he told me more about himself and why he founded Wealthfront and his beliefs and his vision. And he bought me a cookie at specialties, and I'll never forget. And so that was part of the conversation. That was like, I definitely need to work for this man. He's incredible. Um, when I first joined, the what we had to do was basically just open up to beyond word of mouth marketing. So at 24 people, Wealthfront had, I don't remember how many assets under management we had, like how much money. That's the metric by which fintech institutions, banks, or retail banks like assess their success is like how much money they actually have under management. It's called assets under management, AUM. I don't remember how much the AUM was, but it was well under $500 million. And that was all word of mouth, just like people in Silicon Valley who knew about what Wealthfront was trying to build and telling each other about it. And what we needed to do when Wealthfront decided to open up marketing as a function was get out to the broader world, or like, even just like penetrate Silicon Valley more. And in the very beginning, what we were selling was an automated investment service, but we had some high, um, a pretty high bar for a new customer to hurdle over in advance of being able to even open an account. So in the very beginning, Wealthfront was automated investment services for accounts that were a minimum of $5,000. So it's like a non-trivial amount of money that you had to be ready to lock up into a long-term investment strategy. And you had to know what a long-term investment strategy was. And you had to be interested in the long-term investment strategy. And so those three things were like that was the start of the marketing. It's like, how do I explain to people, how do we explain to people what's the difference between long-term passive investing and the kind of investing that people tend to think about when they first hear the words investing, which is like that's more of the Wolf of Wall Street type of investing. That's like the day trading type of situation. That's the beat the market Jim Cramer type of like chest pounding investing. That's what people tend to think about, and that's pretty much the opposite of what Wealthfront does. A lot of education, just a ton of product education, like leaning on expertise that we had in house and really lifting up some of the incredible authorities on the topic that we were working with, like Bert Malkiel, who was our chief investment officer and literally wrote the book called A Random Walk Down Wall Street, like the primer on why you should be passively investing for the long term. So that was basically the entire first 2 years was elevating all of that, teaching people.
And it sounds like a lot of that education and sort of building trust in the market, it was mostly like content marketing. Because I imagine automated investing and long-term investing, this stuff are like scary concepts for a lot of
Yeah,
people. And
yeah.
so, yeah, so was it mostly content marketing of sort of how you push that message, or was there other things that you were doing as well?
Both of those things. So it was mostly content marketing, but there was a lot of product marketing involved. And so the difference between those two is like I would say probably comes down to the channels in which you create those materials for. So the Wealthfront blog, for example, was our um probably the thing that we held up most on a pedestal as just incredible knowledge from really trustworthy experts written in a way that we sought to educate people. And some of it wasn't even about things you could do with Wealthfront. It was just like, you can trust the people that built Wealthfront because they're writing and telling you about um, your equity plan at your startup that you work at, because the majority of our early days customers were engineers and tech people in Silicon Valley, um, because they were the ones in the earliest days who trusted that machines can do a lot of things better than humans can, including invest money, right? Like this was a key, like there's a foundational philosophy you had to believe in. And so the Wealthfront blog was our content marketing engine, even though we weren't just writing about investing in there. We were kind of writing off of the themes of investing, like investing in yourself, investing in your career. What is equity? How do RSUs work? How do preferred stock options work? And all this kind of stuff that, you can't put your stock options inside of Wealthfront. You still can't to this day, but we were teaching and we were engendering trust. And then on the flip side of the product marketing, when we actually were explaining what the product does and what the features are, and every time we rolled out a new service, the component marketing pieces, uh, that involved a lot of like creativity to make them mainstream consumer could pick up and to learn from. So that was like, for example, Wealthfront was the first automated investment service to debut tax loss harvesting, and then the first to do direct indexing, which is an even more sophisticated financial technique that we automated. And so people that do these sophisticated investing techniques in the real world, like pre apps and pre services that do it using machines, uh, they don't even know how to explain it. You know what I mean? So we have to figure out how to explain the concept in general. We have to figure out how to explain the concept in general as it is practiced by machines and the software and the algorithms. And then we have to like kind of do it in a way that engenders trust, because this was pre AI. This was pre like, it's okay to let the machine do your work for you. And actually, that guy, that wolf on Wall Street who your parents know or your uncle or your aunt has the hookup for, like, you don't need that guy. What you need is like a trustworthy automated solution like Wealthfront. So there's a lot of like a product marketing, which I would really kind of distinctly put in its own corner away from the blog and the content marketing that we were doing.
Let's go a level deeper on the product launches, because you mentioned a few that you had launched at Wealthfront, like the index investing, and I think you
Mhm.
also did like the first mobile app for iOS and some others. Like, were any of those product launches super memorable? And can you like take us behind the scenes of an actual product launch? Because like there's a lot of like understanding. Okay, I know you didn't work on Wall Street before this. Like, what is this thing that they're actually building, turning that into marketing messaging, making all the collateral? Like, what did that actually look like at
Yeah,
Wealthfront?
it was really fun. So for example, for the launch of tax loss harvesting, this was the first time that we had to, well, we decided to do a video and we decided to do an animation, so an animated cartoon. So this was, approaching 8 years ago. And the cartoon, like the animation, in order to translate a complicated financial technique into an animated, uh, very, very short film, like an explainer video, you have to first understand the concept so well that you then translate it to the designers and the animators who are making your video, right? And you have to think up the analogy. Like, what is the analogy for tax loss harvesting? It's like you have to do something in to make it visual, because you can't just write tax loss harvesting in like fancy fonts and put some colors on there and that's your explainer. No, that doesn't explain anything, right? You have to. So we figured out this analogy where you are planting seeds and they grow, but certain of your trees don't grow. In fact, they stay rooted, and you can rip them out, rip your losses out, you harvest those losses. And so it's just this whole complicated but gettable analogy. It's like way more artistic and interesting and like intellectually kind of definitely intellectual exercise. And you get to see that whole thing come to life, right? Like as a marketer, you are first yourself. Like you mentioned, I didn't come from investment banking. I didn't study it. I had finance 101 in college, and that's where I kind of really started to like it on a personal level, to like it enough to want to do it for myself and study it a little bit more personally. And that's why I became a customer of Wealthfront when I first read about it. But I didn't have the education required, right? So you have to go so deep that you get it. And then you have to turn around and teach other people because they have to get it in order to illustrate your concept. And then you get all the way to this finished explainer video and people watch it and it makes sense. And the best thing about the video, like when you tell stories with video and when you use those videos to explain concepts, the way that you know that it works in the world of marketing, right? In the world of tech marketing, or maybe I don't want to like overgeneralize and say that this like always works and that's how you know. But for me, in my career so far, I take it as a huge success when on launch day, the video that you created gets embedded in the assets created by other people. The journalist is writing up the story about you, your company, your launch, the thing that you debuted that day, and they willfully chose to embed your assets in their work, you know you did a good job because they are very like allergic to journalists are allergic to anything that seems like it sells too hard. They don't want to inject any more advertising into their, difficult to read websites as they already are, but if they choose to embed your assets, it's like win, 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 win. Everybody wins, and then years later, I'm still Googling these articles so that I can kind of show my prior work as it is held up and endorsed by other people. So this happened at Wealthfront for tax loss harvesting in a couple of in at least one financial trade press blog that like covers all the fintech happenings. And then it happened at Segment when we launched a product called Sources. And the TechCrunch article that came out on the day of the launch, on the day of Sources launch, had my video in it. And it's like very gratifying when that's how you know that it's received well.
I've been on the other side of that, of like trying to put together the press packet and have all my little GIFs and images and stuff, and then it's like, nope, they just go with
Yeah,
some
none of them.
stock image, and you're like, what? Like, come
Yeah,
on, I made this nice
yeah,
thing for you, but I totally get their
yeah.
perspective too. Yeah, no, that's a great test that I've never thought of before. Yeah, and I've tried and failed many a time.
You
Yeah,
never know. It's not you can't ask. That's one thing you can't do, right? It's like you
yeah.
can't ask the journalist to include your assets. You can only just try to be like, and we made these other things, and like, feel free to use them if they're helpful. And try to like incept the idea of using the assets that you've already created.
How did you get the press in the first place? Did you have a deliberate strategy to go reach out to journalists and things like that? Or do you think it was just buzzy enough that you were able to kind of ride the zeitgeist and they were excited to write about it?
We had a deliberate strategy. Well, I mean, I'm sure, well, you can always say that it's buzzy and it was interesting and it was frontier like they call this robo advisors, and at the time when I was at Wealthfront, Andy Ratcliffe really didn't like the term robo advisors at all because again this was like pre generative AI, pre robo anything being a good thing. It's like too much RoboCop and not enough like Chat GPT, which is 10 years away. um but we had a really incredible PR leader, Kate Walk. You could interview her next and find out all of her secrets because she stayed at Wealthfront, like a true believer for close to 10 years now. She's like incredible, been with it since the very beginning and still there, like just making it shine.
Very cool.
Hmm.
And while you were at Wealthfront, I think you ran a big direct response TV commercial campaign. I'd love to spend some time talking about it because it was really interesting as I was reading a little bit about it. And so I'd love to start with the beginning. Like, why did you decide to run a big TV commercial campaign? And like, what was the strategy and sort of your thinking going into it?
Yeah, well, we decided to run TV ads partly because it was time. It was well, like we perceived it to be time within our, growth trajectory to really try to break out into the mainstream. So one thing that we were doing really well is appealing to people who had an easier time picking up the idea that software does things better than humans can, and you should automate your investing. And those people happen to primarily be, in Silicon Valley and then in New York, of course. And usually they were engineers, software people, tech people, product people. They were just like software adjacent, and so it was not unusual to them to think this way. And it was not unusual to them to seek out software solutions to, the everyday kind of questions that they were asking themselves about their own investing and their own finances and their own money, right? It's early fintech. It's not, this was, Robinhood was maybe just on the being born side. And certainly not, this was pre like AMC theaters, crazy. Everybody's using Robinhood to invest in meme stocks like that. None of that was happening, right? This is like, can you trust a computer to do any of this? Like we just barely had passed over the like peak online banking. Can I get an online bank? Um, so we needed to go mainstream beyond the people who were already comfortable with it. We wanted to pick up regular consumers. And like, what do regular consumers do? at the time they were just beginning to cord cut. Sure, but plenty of them were still watching TV with commercials, you know? And so we picked up, it wasn't enough for us to do one commercial because one commercial, we thought it was just too risky. You can't just, you don't know what a mainstream consumer is going to respond to. And you can commit to a brand, but you can commit to a brand idea and like one campaign, but it's expensive to do that, and it's expensive to go all in. So what we wanted to do was actually we created a lot of different ideas and we tested a lot of different creative concepts. So we bought the same amount of time on the air as we would have for one commercial, but we created like 35 commercials instead and just slotted them in over the same period of time, which was basically over 1 year. We did it in two halves. We created first like 15 to 20 commercials, and then we were like, let's do it again. Let's do another 15. The reason we did that is because we really wanted to see what people reacted to, what got them going, what got them clicking, what they wrote in about. And frankly, it surprised us. So everyone kind of had this internal, not, we didn't actually do bets, but it was kind of as though it was a pool where, I certainly thought that you don't need that guy commercials would go pretty well, and it wasn't that. It was the ones that were a little bit more fear, uncertainty, and doubt oriented, where people were moved into action by thinking about their futures and their retirement and running out of money and having to flip burgers in retirement. That was an actual storyline to a commercial that we released that people responded pretty actively to. And it's never the ones that you think it's going to be. So, the idea that you would go all in on one script and one storyline, now that I've experienced doing the opposite of that, is like a little bit shocking that anybody does that.
And how did you, I mean, it must have been just a ton of work to create like 35 different commercial spots. Were they like, did you just test the messaging in each commercial, or are there unique actors and setups and scenes? Like, how drastic was the test?
Yes, good question. We had to do it in as scrappy a way as possible. So one way we did that was I worked really closely. We worked really closely with this one production company in LA that I had sourced, and they were incredible in that they were really willing to be um, catering of their work style to this like scrappy approach. So what we did was we booked one location across 4 days. Over those 4 days, we would do one scene, like basically one setup per day, which meant that like we kind of started our script making within certain constraints that would enable us to book a set like that. So, for example, on day one, we would record a a set that was like inside of a house, inside of a kitchen. And in the kitchen, we had two different scripts, two different scenes, two different setups, but with the same actors. So, so basically, now you have two different commercials recorded in a day on one set. On the next day, you could record in the backyard because you would be set up in the backyard and you had a whole different script and you had the same actors. They were wearing different clothes, but like they had a different scenario that they were running through, and now they're doing a thing in the backyard. You're still on the same set, so like you've extended your stay one day. And then the next setup that you record like is on the couch in the living room. It's a whole different scenario that they're running through, like why they need to do automated investing. But now they're sitting on the couch and there's two dudes talking to each other. These were our hipster series, which actually did do pretty well. And then in the next in the afternoon, they're doing the yoga scene, which is like in a different room in the house. They're both doing yoga and they're talking about Wealthfront. It was ridiculous and it was fun and it was funny, but like you can see how basically that kind of all aligns into this economies of scale where you envision the scenarios within the constraints of the cost of the set and the production. But once you get that out of the way, like those set costs, then you're able to be really creative in your like storytelling within those constraints. Oh, we have a house, great. We have the backyard, we have a living room, we have a couch, we have a kitchen, we have a this, we have a fireplace, we have a that. And like, what stories do you tell within those constraints? You could be a little bit more scrappy than you might imagine.
Yeah, I filmed one commercial in my life for Lattice, and yeah, we didn't have a huge budget, but it was really interesting. Yeah, how the constraints just informed the creativity. Because once it was like, okay, here was my budget, that
Yes.
then the agency and the director we were working with was like, okay, well, here's what we can do. It could only be a
Yeah.
1 day shoot at
Yep.
one location, and then the script and the story all sort of forms around that constraint. And it honestly, like at first you're like, oh, that's annoying. I want this and I want that. But then it
Yeah.
actually sort of forces the idea and makes it,
Totally.
better along the way. But it's really fun
Totally.
to do.
It's totally fun. And I think that honestly, if I had to boil down my most saleable marketing skill that I learned across that year of making commercials, making short films, if you will, like if you'll grant them that artistic license, is if you understand the constraints of production, you can do incredible storytelling. And if you have that opportunity once, twice, three times, you can take that skill with you wherever you go to become a marketer thereafter. You can tell story, you understand what goes in here, and suddenly, like the people that you hire, the production crews, the contractors, the freelancers, they're like, "Oh my God, are you speaking my language?" Because it's so frequently you're not speaking the same language. You, as a creative person, as a marketer who hasn't done any production, you have visions, right? But they're based on things that you've seen on the other side of the screen. You've never seen how it gets made, how the sausage gets made. Once you see how the sausage gets made and you start speaking in and you start like setting up your campaigns and speaking the language of the sausage makers, oh my gosh, you can achieve so much more um economic output. You can achieve better relationships with your vendors. You can work more efficiently. Like it's incredible. So, learn the language of the sausage maker. That's my takeaway there.
I love it. We got to clip that one.
Yeah, exactly. Learn the language of the sausage maker. That's the intro that you'll just use
Yeah.
then.
And then you mentioned this as in the beginning as you were talking about the campaign, but like how did you actually measure the success? Like did you have unique URLs in commercials, or was it more just like a qualitative feedback you heard? Like yeah, how did you think about which, figuring out which variation worked?
Yeah, we actually tried to be as like programmatic as possible in that we hired this one agency that specialized in commercial awareness, or not commercial, but like literally TV spot awareness and measurement. And what we did was we, again, were pretty scrappy with how we purchased our spots. I don't remember like the terminology anymore. There's some very like inside baseball terminology, and maybe it's not really a thing anymore as everyone has cut the cord. But when you're buying spots, there's a difference between buying spots like on cable versus the different like local access and like these different channels. So there are certain channels that, broadly speaking, cover the entire United States, no matter what cable network you're on. And so the cable companies, they whatever contracts they have enable them to just play the feeds. And then there's some that are broken down by geography and region. So like regional buying you can do where for example, that your spot is going to be on Bravo and on ESPN and on E exclamation point or whatever during these very specific time slots in these very specific regions. So I'm playing like Midwestern on Bravo at 4 p.m. Central Time, and I just know that that's when my spot's going live. That's when I'm going to watch app download traffic, and that's when I'm going to watch traffic to the site in rolling 8 minute increments, right? So it's like the math there was really specific. It was like, okay, for this 8 minutes, this was the traffic coming from Chicago or the Midwest area. And then the next 8 minutes, and then the next 8 minutes, and the next 8 minutes, the commercial happened in the following 8 minutes. Like, oh my God, spikes, actual real spikes. And you can start to measure that. You're not going to have 100% accuracy, right? Because that's not how people think or do stuff. But certain commercials just move people more than others. And you would actually see spikes, from mostly mobile, right? Because if they're sitting there watching TV, most likely the traffic is going to be coming from a phone if they're very curious and they were moved into action right thereafter. So that's how we would measure it.
Yeah, makes sense. It reminds me of something I tried to do at Lattice too, whereas we put billboards in different cities and then would watch sort of, the uplift in traffic
Yeah,
from,
and
okay, if
organic
we put a
traffic.
billboard. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it wasn't the 8 minute rolling increments would have been really fun and exciting.
Yeah,
That sounds
very
awesome.
specific.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Like,
Okay.
so after Wealthfront, you joined Segment. I'd love to know like why'd you join Segment and kind of what was it like when you joined?
Yeah. So the reason I joined Segment is because I was looking to get back into B2B marketing. And I think B2B marketing and B2C marketing are pretty pretty different animals and different specialties that you end up really flexing. Um, and the reason I wanted to get back into B2B is because I had been having a really interesting adventure with B2C selling consumers like sophisticated investment services, basically. So when the market was up and to the right, which it was for several of those first years, that uh, everything you just felt like a genius. You could just pat yourself on the back, like, "Oh my gosh, I'm the world's best marketer. This is the world's best company. Everything's going well. Everything's up and to the right." And then the second the market gets just a little bit choppy, just like slightly volatile, you can see that reflected in people's actions because they're moved to this degree when they're thinking about their money and their personal assets and like whether or not they can afford it. It's like a very true gripping sense. And as a marketer, I got to this place where I was like, oh man, there's very little that I can do to convince people to do the right thing. And it was kind of like a little bit demotivating. It was difficult. It was incredibly challenging to be like, I know that the right thing to do when the market is volatile is nothing. Don't do anything. Stop opening your app. Don't even look at it. It's not doing you any favors. You're not going to change the trajectory of the market by getting stressed out, upset, and worried about it. And certainly what you don't want to do is sell. Sell, 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 right? Which is your first instinct and the thing that most people do. That's literally the opposite of what you should be doing. In fact, the truly sophisticated investors buy more because they're buying at a discount, generally speaking, right? In the world of passive long-term investing. And it's very, very difficult to convince mainstream consumer to do the right thing because it goes so against what they want to do, which is like cut their losses and peace out. So I wanted to get back into B2B marketing because, my point of view is that a B2B consumer is just a little bit more rational, a little bit more logical, a little bit less um, motivated by their gut, and a little bit more motivated by, education and rationale. And probably it's not their money, so they're just not quite as worried about it, you know?
Yeah.
So when I joined Segment, there were 60 people, and we were selling a very clear cut, very clear cut B2B product that had no overlap into your personal life, which really quite appealed to me.
Yeah. No, the hard part with B2C, yeah, it's just like so much about the cultural zeitgeist and it gets trendy and then it doesn't, and it's hard to
Yeah,
catch those waves. And yeah, I always, as an entrepreneur, you're always like, oh, you kind of start on the consumer side and it's because that's like fun to make things like that.
yeah,
But then the best part about B2B is like you're solving a real business problem and your customers will talk to you and tell you
yes,
exactly how you can solve their problems and how you can get paid to solve their problems. And
yeah,
so, yeah, when I figured that out, when I joined Lattice, I was like, okay, this is a better spot for me to play in as well. Yeah.
yeah.
And it seemed like when you first were at Segment, you focused on demand gen, and then you kind of switched back to kind of your core competency around brand and comms. Can you talk about kind of what that experience was like in the early days and maybe the evolution of the marketing team at Segment?
Sure, yeah. So when I started, there was another marketer and myself, and then we grew a teams around us. So basically, in the earliest days, we were just hired to just help us do marketing. Just help. Just come here and help. And so literally my first project within 3 weeks of arrival. Well, before I even arrived, I got an email from the first marketer being like, "We're launching a product within a month of your arrival. Whoop, yoo-hoo, or woohoo rather." And she's like, "I know that you love video because had just come fresh off the Wealthfront like year of commercials. Should we do a video for this?" And so, despite the fact that I got hired in to be a product marketer, I'm arriving and like on day one, hiring the same production company, doing the same setup, and immediately flying to LA to shoot a commercial and a series of actually a series of two, uh, to one say what is segment and two launch sources, which was the first product. So like, despite what you're hired in to do or what your title says, at those earliest stages of a startup, you end up doing all the things that need to be done, and then it quickly becomes evident like what you're good at, what you really spike in, what the other person spikes in, how you're complementary with each other, and how you're going to grow the teams, right? And so, yeah, over time, like we actually ended up having a discussion, Diana and myself, being like, I love and it fills my cup to do brand marketing. This is what it means, and the creative component. She's like, it fills my cup to do product marketing, and we literally ended up switching. And so that's how we grew. And then we soon thereafter we had a VP growth join, Guillaume Caban, who like he's definitely known as the mad scientist, and I can say with like 100% certainty he is still a mad scientist. I recently hung out with him, and he was just like his crazy spike, and the thing that filled his cup and the way that he got energy was to think up these like off the wall, outlandish growth experiments. We'd make them live quickly, like half of them will work, half of them wouldn't, and we would just run all together. And I would create the campaigns, and Diana would actually write in the like, well, this is how the product works within the realm of this campaign, and who we're selling it to, and who actually would care about this feature and this component. And Guillaume would be like, deploy crazy test that strings together like 17 of our MarTech tools within our stack. Does it work? Do we get more leads in the pipeline? Are the salespeople fed? That's how we three work together over time.
I love it. There's such a good lesson in there around, I don't know, yeah, one, focusing on exactly what you want to focus on, and also just being flexible in the early days of a startup. So many things are changing, so many things are moving, and you just got
Yeah,
to kind of shift to where you personally both can add the most value and where
yeah,
you're having the most fun. And I'd love to go deeper on brand building, because I think it's like a really hard activity for people to grok and understand. It's such a nebulous activity. And
yeah,
so like, how did you think about building the brand at Segment, and like what does that work actually look like? Are you creating a bunch of internal positioning documents and then going to run and make commercials? Like what is that? Can you kind of take us behind the scenes of that?
yeah, yeah. I think in the earliest days, it really helped to like kind of get an almost like an establishing shot. So an establishing shot in like movie lingo is that first 30 seconds of a film that you're watching where you can actually you're supposed to be able to tell where you are based on what you see, right? So the establishing shot of Manhattan is like classics, like looking down, you see Central Park, you see the tall buildings. Establishing shot of San Francisco is usually, but not always, the Golden Gate Bridge. Despite like whatever part of the Bay Area the film is actually shot in, first thing you see is the Golden Gate Bridge. You're like, oh, I'm in the Bay Area. So if you could have an establishing shot for your brand at the very beginning, that really helps. There's some understanding of what if I showed you this, you would be like, yeah, 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 this feels right. This feels right. And what I mean by that is I think it took those first set of videos, uh, the picking, first of all, you pick a script and you do it with your founders. Like you pitch them a series of ideas, they only like a few, and then you narrow down to what feels right when we talk about segment, what feels right when we think about you're going to see this on a screen. It's going to be the first representation of a story, that we're telling that is like an analog to real life that makes sense to you, and the styling of it is specific, and the words that we use, that's setting a tone, and we have to be completely in alignment that we love this, that we're proud of this. And if you get that right, you can actually just see, you can just basically see the line that comes out and all of the branching paths that the marketing campaigns of the future take, but you can trace them all back to that like establishing shot. For example, at Segment, our first video was what is segment? And if you search that, it's still live. My girl with the red hair, she's an engineer. Her name is Cassie. We named her. She's the actor in the video, and she is sitting inside of a really rad helmet making company. And I use the word rad specifically because she says, I work at a rad helmet making, or I make rad helmets. We make rad helmets. Like customer can design their own helmets. And like the whole thing was fun and interesting and quirky. We made a whole bunch of the production company made these like ridiculously cool helmets that were just like, a motorcycle hipsters, dream, which are the spikes and the hair and the polka dots and whatever. And we built all of that so that we can put them all in the establishing shot for the video. She says the word rad a couple times. We explain what Segment does. She's still a software engineer. She's still in her element. She's still taking time to explain somewhat realistically, but the concept of what Segment is. But we've set the establishing shot. The reason the video is still live 6 years later, 7 years later, is because it turned out to be evergreen. You don't always go into like brand building with the idea that your work's going to be evergreen. But if it works, it works. It's like this magical moment where all the stars have aligned. And so I think if you can get an establishing shot that you're very proud of, like within the company, all of the most important stakeholders, the founders, the people who are building it from the ground up, they feel proud of that work. You're just going to see it. It's just going to you're going to keep building off of that as opposed to they're not proud of it. So you actually see it changing quite often, which means there's no consistency, which means there's very little recall, right? And that's when you're not doing a great job building that brand.
And so you have this establishing shot that sort of sets the tone for the brand, but then the product and everything evolves, right? The market's
Yeah.
evolving, your
Yeah.
competition's evolving, you're adding a bunch of new products into the suite. Like, how did you think about sort of evolving Segment's brand over time? And maybe what did it look like 5-6 years later? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to some extent, it really becomes higher and higher production value. And to some extent, you also just expand the places where you are building a brand. So where, the style of our video production didn't really change. What we did do is add in a whole bunch of different channels over 5.5 years that I was there, where we were establishing our brand, right? So in the beginning, it was just with some videos. And then we put on a user conference. And the first year, and it had its own brand. It was called Synapse. In the first year, there was 400 people. The second year, there was 800 people. The third year, there was like closer to 2,000 people. And you are building the Synapse brand in parallel with Segment. Then you do billboards, you do out of home. Even your billboards change in style. And then maybe the culmination is like a three-dimensional, like physical board with props on it that's in the Bay Area. If anybody listening is in the Bay Area, off the 80 East going towards Bay Bridge, it's still up.
It's a great
And so
billboard.
I think
I
you
know that one well.
expand.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. But it makes me really proud every time I drive past it.
Let's talk about the user conference, then we'll go back to billboards in a second. Like,
Sure.
so yeah, Synapse, you talked a little about like the evolution in terms of numbers, but like, yeah, why did you even create a user conference in this first place? I mean, I know when I try to do this at Laz, it's so expensive,
Yeah,
a lot of work, right? And
it's a
so,
lot of work.
yeah, like, why did you do it? And can you talk about, bringing it to life?
It is a lot of work, and you really like as a startup have to think really hard about when you're ready for it because basically I do think that once you debut a user conference, you can't go back. Like you're not going to stop doing it, and you shouldn't stop doing it because that sends a whole different message. It didn't work. We failed at this. We don't have enough users for user conference. We can't justify this. Like you don't want to do that. You don't want to be that startup. So like if you're committing to a program basically for life, you have to make sure you're ready. So why do you do it? Because all of the best tech companies have one. Because you have a community of users out in the world somewhere in the wild and bring them together where they're all in the same place at the same time, learning about your product because they're actually kind of excited to be there and learn about what you're debuting. There is no better gratification for a software company than actually seeing it, right? Like you spend every single day building stuff for people. You're delighted when they use it. You're delighted when they buy it. But there's nothing that feels better than you get them all in the same auditorium and they're rip roaring ready to hear you say like what you're about to announce as a product, and people clap, applaud, and whoop and cheer, and you didn't pay them to do it, like that's it's a rush like you've never experienced before. On the business side, you're looking at retention, you are looking at contract expansion, because typically, you're trying to align your conference around, you're launching something big and new. You want to launch something big and new every year if you can. And every time you do, you do it on the hopes that it will make your product more sticky, or you're going to charge more for it, so it will make your company more money. And like you have this literally a focal point to align the entire company around. Like, we are launching this in March, um, or nothing. There's no other choice, because we put it up, we sold the tickets, and we're going to be there in March, and we're going to launch this thing. Which is where, in some cases you see like a vaporware launch, is because, like, the cart got put before the horse. You didn't actually build the product, it's not ready, but you have the auditorium full of people and they're waiting, and like, well, it's got to be launched somehow. But unfortunately, that is also like a type of standard that you can fall back on if you really need to.
Yeah, when we did this at Lattice, it was amazing to watch the internal, the crazy amount of internal focus and push towards the conference, but then also just how excited everyone was when the conference came.
Yeah.
Like the look on Jack, the CEO's face when he got on stage and could feel the community
Yeah.
and stuff that he had helped build, and just everyone was smiling and exciting, and like, I don't know how much like revenue or pipeline or whatever it drove, but
Yeah.
it definitely
Yeah.
like retained employees, got customers so excited, and like, we sit behind our computers all day.
Yeah.
It's so different to be in a room full of your customers and everyone
Totally.
is super excited. It's like an
Yeah.
amazing feeling.
100% agree. But then you have to keep doing it every year.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have like a recommendation for companies thinking about this? I mean, is the best way to think about it like budget perspective? Like, I think at Lattice, I mean, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers. We did a smaller one for like couple $100K, 200 to
Yeah.
400 maybe, and then it was like, oh, let's do $1 million one, and
Mm-hmm.
COVID hurt that idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, how do you think about when should companies do this?
Yeah. Well, so as far as when, I actually think that it's okay to start small. Like, you don't have to wait until you have thousands of users or thousands of customers. It's really about when you want to start punching above your weight class, but you're ready to commit. You are dedicated to the idea of and forming and feeding a community around your product. And if you can envision one future day where, like, you know, Dreamforce, right? Like, Dreamforce is like one of your guiding stars. You can envision doing a conference for 20 years, and the audience just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Like, it's time, right? That's when it's time. Is you can actually envision it. You can actually tie a thread, even if it's a dream thread. That's when you can start, especially when you're on like project like roadmap or product roadmap and launch cadence, where you can actually start sorting away from just like constant small launches into, let's have a big vision. Let's share a big vision. Let's unite customers around a big vision. That's when it's a good time. And you can start small, and by small I mean like 100 people at a conference. Still great. Still a great time, because you record the whole thing. You have the video for video on demand afterwards, and you could stream it. People can stream it as often as they want. 100 people inside of the correctly sized space are still having a really great time together when it's a well produced, like, high production value event. And I always used to think about it like, I know this is probably not the gold standard of an event planner, but I used to think about it on a cost per. I would think about all my stuff as a cost per unit. That for me was the simplest like way of keeping track and not letting things go too far awry. And for me, like a golden number was about $1,000 a head, $1,000 a head for segment, for user conference, and not above that. And that's where I kept like the line is, if you can go all in with your vendors and your services and all the fees, and you just like everything stacks up, you've spent $1,000 like making sure that one customer in the audience has had a good time that day. You don't need to go too far. Like it's really easy to spiral out of control and end up spending a lot more than that, but you don't need to. That's about the amount where you can fed them, you can keep them nicely fed. They had a good time and they were accounted for like, 8 hours that day. And it felt like pretty high production value. But on the flip side, like that, it's kind of scrappy when you actually start to break it down. And in fact, with service costs being really, really, really high now in a city like San Francisco, where there's a lot of unions and like labor unions inside of large event spaces, now maybe it's like 1,200, 1,300, but you do not need to be spending $3,000 per head. And then another mistake that you don't need to make is, you think about your conference as the time that you're going to get the whole company together and attending your conference, right? So this is when you see, I see you've been there. You are seeing like 50 customers in the crowd and 100 people from your staff. And now what did you just do? You spent $1,000 per head because it's just like $1,000 per human person who takes up space. You're blowing it on the people that already work for you as opposed to the customers. So we would only let people come physically to the conference if they had a slot on the stage, if they had some form of work to do in terms of boothing or selling on the floor or volunteering, like directing people to the bathrooms and whatever, all that kind of stuff. And otherwise, you're sitting at the office live streaming it from there.
Yeah, that was very, yeah, you made me think of some very funny internal conversations where it's like, you guys can come, you can't, and it gets
Yeah,
dicey, but to your point, it gets so expensive. And yeah, I think we actually had a very similar budget, $1,000 a head, but that's where it's like, oh, $1 million conference sounds crazy, but if you want 1,000 people at a
yeah,
conference for
exactly.
$1,000 a person, there's your number right there. And it's
Yep.
really hard to do that. In 2019, you ran a national campaign around a great slogan, what good is bad data. Can you kind of talk about that campaign and why did you go with that positioning and kind of what were all the different elements of it?
Yeah, sure. So, what good is bad data? I think the answer, it should be simple. Like, once you think about it, it's like, what good is bad data? It's no good. It's worth literally zero. If your data is wrong, you got nothing. And that was Segment's whole product. Like, if you tie that up in a nutshell, how easy is it to get your data wrong if you don't have a central repository for it and you're sending, different conventionally structured data to all these different providers that you have, and you probably have a lot of providers, and like the chances of something going wrong are like very high unless you have really great data at the source, and the source is what sends the same set of data to all the fanned out like integration vendors that you have. We needed a pithy way to tie that up. So that's what good is bad data. But what good is bad data is just like kind of um, the overlapping idea. That's the closest analogy to like a one liner that you could say. Yeah, so that's what Segment does. You could be like, what good is bad data? No good? Yeah, that's what Segment does. Make sure your data is good so it's not worthless. Um, but then you need offshoots of that campaign slogan basically to make it work, to make it obvious, to make it click for people. And so the first offshoot that we came up with that made it click for people, we did it sitting in a room because our billboard, our placement had to go live within a month and we had nothing and we didn't have a creative agency and we had like the brain trust sitting in a room together, the most creative people and the founders and some of the leaders in charge of, selling, just being like, oh, what are we going to put? What are we going to put? What are we going to put? And the head of comms who worked on my team, he was so brilliant. He said, haha, what good is bad data? Like, what if the billboard just said like, good morning, LA? And the first spot, we're in San Francisco, right? Like the first spot we're talking about that we bought is a board in the city. And everyone's like, we just all burst into laughter. And it seems so ridiculous. It seems so outlandish to put a board up that says "Good morning, LA" in SF. And that's when we knew it was kind of like that is so ridiculous, and we have to do it. But it wouldn't have worked unless our establishing shot, right, that we had from the beginning was like it's okay to be quirky. It's like we're gonna lean into the quirk. We're not gonna be weird about it, but it's always gonna be slightly quirky. And so that was okay with everybody in the room because it had been a part of our culture for years. And we launched with it and it kind of went viral. And because we put Good Morning LA all over San Francisco. And then in LA, we had Good Morning SF in a whole bunch of places in LA. And we got people just, first of all, the people that immediately got it, you knew who they were. They were data people, they were tech people, and the kind of feedback that we got on Twitter and, anecdotally and just people sharing it and writing us emails about it was like, ha ha ha, you made me laugh on my bus ride this morning. And then we got this other class of feedback, which was actually like a gift. It was a gift in disguise, which was people ragging on us because they thought we made a mistake. Like they thought we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars making a mistake as rudimentary as putting the wrong billboard in the wrong city. And they're like, I think you guys made a mistake here. Or did you mean to put this there? And there was just so many people who shared about that, like out into social media, just anxious to be like, oh, I found a mistake out in the wild. That was like an unexpected source of virality. So that campaign worked really, really well in two different ways.
I still remember that campaign. I remember driving around SF and seeing it, and that billboard, yeah, like it makes you go, aha, and it just
Yeah,
stands out. It is so memorable and funny. I mean, and that's the secret to good billboard advertising. Like, you can't
yeah,
just have like your vanilla messaging out there. It's like Segment is a data platform. It's like,
yeah,
no, like you need something that gets people to like laugh a little or just
yeah,
while they're driving their cars, distract them and stuff.
yeah.
And
You do
so,
your
yeah,
best,
no, it
right?
was
You
awesome.
do
Yeah.
the best you can. Like there's no formula. It's just like every so often you get so lucky. You work with creative people and everyone laughs and you're like, well, we're running it. Like we'll do it live. Like we're gonna try it. And
Yeah.
yeah, stroke of luck.
My best campaign was it was in the first crypto craze, and we were selling like HR tech company, and we put up a billboard like invest in your people, not crypto.
I like it.
And got a ton of angry crypto people yelling at us and stuff. But then, it was like, a good message that we wanted to send, and it stood
Heck yeah.
out, and it was funny. Yeah.
I
Coinbase,
bet
our
it was
customer, wasn't too happy, but it was good.
That's funny. Well, I bet you had both types of people. You had the angry crypto people being like, "What the hell?" And then you had people on the flip side of the crypto bros, like very anti-crypto bro, being like, "Thank you, yes, yes,
Yes,
you know
exactly.
what I mean?" Like you actually have
Yeah.
these opposites. Maybe there's something there, which is you look for a way that you can speak to two groups of people, and you wouldn't mind speaking to two groups of people.
Yeah. Well, that's the hard part with billboards in general is like you're speaking to everyone,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
everyone is going to see this. And so you need like a way to cut through the noise to your audience while not like, but also somehow talking to other people too. And it's such a
Yeah,
tricky little balance there.
yeah,
But yeah, no, it's fun. Billboards are really fun. I spent so
agreed.
many times like walking by people at desks and being like, what do you think of this ad? What do you think of that ad? And like,
Yeah,
it's fun to come up with it and scary too, because you're like putting his big message out into the world and you can't really change it like
literally.
you can in digital.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you have like a
Yeah.
month, right? Within a month, you can scrap it, but you don't want to. It's because then you're like you are giving into no recall.
Yeah, exactly. So Segment was eventually acquired by Twilio, and
Mhm.
you were there for kind of that acquisition. I'd love to just kind of hear like what that was like from your perspective, and how did that impact your job as running brand and comms? Did you have to update all the positioning? Was it more independent? Yeah, how do you think about it?
Yes, actually, there was a moment in time where it was like immediate. You are immediately thrown into the fire of like you have to integrate the messaging as fast as possible because you're being absorbed into a publicly traded company. And so there's a lot of things about the way that publicly traded companies are like regulated and the way their communications are received and the way their communications are put out into the world that you can't just be, basically you're not messing around anymore because they're regulated and they're your mom now. And so you have to like, do stuff that mom says. And within a week, you're on calls about here's some brand directions for the logo. Is it going to be segment by Twilio segment? Is it going to be segment a Twilio company. Like, there's optionality there, and so you try to like look at other examples of the way other software brands that were acquired into the Twilio family, like what did they do? Should we be consistent? Should they not? And of course, you're going with the flow of what your new corporate overlords want, and that's fine, right? Like that they're your parents now, and so you go with it. That's how Segment became Twilio Segment. And that's how the logo, I think, in the last year became capitalized again. It's just like these brand decisions that are you have a different mom now.
Yeah. I love the parents analogy because
Yeah, they're your parents
it's a
now.
good one. It's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. So I'd love to end today's conversation by just maybe giving some advice to, startups or founders who, want to start investing into some of the things that we've talked about today, brand and comms. Like, yeah, what advice do you give them? Like, when can they start investing in these activities? When do you maybe hire a dedicated team? Like, as you're talking to other founders or marketing leaders in this world, yeah, what's your advice for them?
Oh, that's an interesting one to try to just boil down into some advice tidbits. But I would say the following. I think creativity is the thing that you are looking for when you are trying to build and nurture your own brand. And the best thing to do is look around inside of your company and understand and find where the creativity is. Because believe it or not, like the type of creativity that I'm talking about, it's not everybody's skill set. That's literally the reason agencies exist, like creative agencies. Mad Men, the Don Drapers of the world. It's a skill set that is unique to certain people, and they gravitate towards it. The creatives of the world are like, I must work in this way. You can turn around and say they don't have plenty of other skills that you probably do as a founder or a technical person or whatever. There's the way that I am creative, and the way that I spike and the work that I do. I have matching dips on the opposite side where, man, being analytical about something or like filling out a spreadsheet, that's like that's the kind of stuff that will scramble my brain, and like it'll start oozing out from my ears. So these opposites recognize that it's a skill set, and then find the people in your company that have this. They are not always distinctly working on marketing, and that's okay. Pull them into a room for a few sessions on, you know, building the creative component parts of your brand, and be like, how do you talk about it when you talk about it to your friends and your family and your partners and your significant others and your creative people in your life and your side hustle gang? How do you talk about it? What's the latest kind of campaigns that you have seen out in the world that you thought were cool? Get the download from the people that are closest to your company that are actually creative. If there's literally zero people, you can start looking like outside of that. You can bring in the creatives, the agencies. They exist for you. But don't discount that you actually might have very creative people internally that maybe aren't specifically like classified as marketers, but they are the people that will come up with like, wouldn't it be cool if we did this thing at this competitor event that like we put up a billboard that said this? And you're like, oh my God, that is the coolest idea that I've heard in a long time. I know you're not a marketer, but I trust that you're creative and you love this brand, you love this company, you love this product. Let's do the thing. Like that's where I would start. Look internally. If you don't got it, go outside. Okay. Find those people that you bring into your fold, and then start there.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation, Maya. If people want to reach out to you and learn more, I know you're maybe doing some consulting these days to
Yeah.
help other startups and founders. Where can people find you?
Yes. I think the easiest way is find me on LinkedIn. I am Maya Spivak, and find me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a note. Connect with me, and we will. I'm always happy to connect. Plus, I'm in San Francisco, so like any chance to meet IRL after these 3 years of being a shut-in, I take those chances. So yeah, hit me up. LinkedIn is probably the easiest way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's a wrap on another episode of Grow and Tell. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, or find every episode at growandtellshow.com. I'm your host, Alex Krakov. Thank you for listening.